This is BSA by Design, a podcast about transforming healthcare, educational, and research facilities through expert design and insight. I'm your host, Brian Moore. In this episode, we're going to explore how sustainability, resilience, and public health are converging to transform the future of architecture and engineering. And we'll look at why the most successful buildings don't just perform efficiently, they actively support human health, adapt to changing conditions, and challenge the industry to design with people at the center of every decision. Let me introduce our guests, Drew Hustedy and Dr. Saidra Goldman. Dr. Saidra Goldman is a health and design performance strategist at BSA with AILAP certifications. She earned her master's and doctorate degrees in environmental occupational health from the Colorado School of Public Health and her Bachelor of Architecture in Architecture from Rice University. Dr. Goldman has had her research published in multiple peer-reviewed journals, including the Health Environments Design, HERD, journal, and the Journal of American Medical Directors Association. Drew Hustedy is BSA's sustainability lead and a senior architect. He graduated from Rankin Technical College with a BS in Architecture and Architecture Technology and earned his Master of Architecture from Southern Illinois University. He is NCARB certified and LEED AP Building Design and Construction certified through the Green Business Certification, Inc. Welcome to the show, Drew, Saidra. Drew, thanks for coming back on. Saidra, I know this is your first time. So can you share with our listeners your profession and where your passion comes from, a little background bio, if you will?
Absolutely, Brian. Thanks for having me on the show. Has been somewhat unconventional, I would say. I started working in traditional architecture firms when I graduated from college with my architecture degree. But once I was licensed, I decided to pivot to project management, owner's rep work, and review services and sustainability consulting. I had my own company for about 15 years. And during that time, the well building standard, I was kind of in a position where I was looking for something that spoke to my soul for my career advancement. And when I learned about the well building standard, that really was it. I loved the idea that there was a focus on how to design to promote health and well-being. For as long as I can remember, I have felt that the design and operation of these spaces is an opportunity to impact the mental and physiological health. And I haven't seen that really utilized by architects and designers. And so this was definitely an aha moment for me, and decided to not just pivot professionally to doing that. I decided I really wanted to go all in and gain the knowledge required to take this next step. So I decided to get a graduate education in environmental and occupational health and look at the real details of this. And so that's what I ended up doing. And I ended up getting my doctorate of public health and was looking for my next opportunity when BSA came along and found that it was a great fit.
And thank you for sharing that because you're such a unique addition. And I think I'm sure we're going to get into today, but just all that you can, that is different than other lenses that we have at the firm. And I'm really excited about that. When you were back on the show earlier this year, you talked a little bit about the shift in conversation around sustainability. And since then, Saidra has joined. How is having a doctor of public health on the design team changed those conversations?
Having Saidra as part of the team has changed those conversations immensely. And really, I would say that the conversation now makes the impact more personal. It's very easy to fall into the bubble of sustainability being solely a building performance thing, a very objective, save energy, save money. But I think now it really rounds it out. It really helps us understand that the priority is around the purpose. The whole purpose of a building is to serve the people and the occupants who experience and interact it, right? And it has a direct influence on the health of its occupants, even those outside of it, in my opinion. And so I think the performance, profit, now those are two slices of the human aspect of it. The life aspect of it is the third, and in my opinion, probably one of the biggest pieces of it all. It's the foundation of it all, why we're doing it.
Yeah, that's really good.
Sadra's involvement in the team, frankly, round us out.
Absolutely. I mean, I know we've had lots of conversations on this show and with you just about that very thing, and the focus on the people who are using or in the buildings and how is the building performing is really fascinating. Sadie, you've built your whole career around this intersection, architect by training, public health by doctorate. What did you see in the built environment that pulled you towards public health, and what made BSA kind of the right place for you?
Well, I think one thing for me is I don't understand how public health and architecture have been as separate as they have been. So I
That's a
kind
good.
of pulled towards it, but it was a very natural thing that both people in architecture or people in public health don't necessarily see that connection, which is really strange to me because urban planning and public health have been together inextricably since like the early 1900s. You had urban planning masters with public health masters. So this is just a natural next step in architecture to me, that we really do look at how important architecture is in helping with the health of the people in these buildings. People are in buildings 90% of the time on average of their time. So why are we not looking at them as vehicles to improve health and well-being the same way we are looking at a park? And
That's a really good point, and it's amazing that just in a general sense, society hasn't thought of it that way yet already. It sounds like for the last 20-ish years, sustainable design and healthy buildings were treated kind of like cousins and not in the same, nuclear family. So, in your opinion, what's driving them together right now?
well, I definitely think they're in the same family. When the USGBC launched the LEED program in the late 1990s, that was a huge step actually towards this healthy building movement, even if that wasn't really the focus that they were saying. And in the last 30 years or so, the guidelines have done a great job on educating design professionals and our clients about the importance of good indoor air quality, good light quality, the use of design, which are all absolutely healthy building, well building concepts. And so LEED served kind of as the incubator for the
Mm,
health building programs that we're seeing really getting some traction now, like Fitwell and like Well. And it makes sense that a lot of the clients that we see pursuing LEED are interested in Well, or that are interested in Well are already pursuing LEED.
Interesting. Where's the line, or is there one, between sustainability and resilience? And do you treat them as the same conversation or kind of two separate, distinct ones?
Sustainability and resiliency really cannot be separated. While it's great to have a building that meets Energy Star requirements or recycles, reduces construction waste, if that building no longer functions after a major weather event or it can't adapt when technology changes, we really have wasted resources unnecessarily. And so, in my mind, that's not a sustainable building.
that's a
Yeah,
good point.
I
Drew,
couldn't
how
agree
about you?
more. I mean, it kind of goes back to that language discussion on everyone kind of defines sustainability differently. It's this huge umbrella term, but logically speaking, if you think about and try to define what resiliency is, in my mind, a little bit more specifically, Sadra hits the nail on the head, right? For a project to be resilient, right, it must hold up to extreme weather events, rapidly changing climate, right? For both money perspective, right, because of all the repairs. In
Mm,
fact, if you ever tie politics into it, they always, well, X trillion dollars in related events and damages, but it's also the risk that it puts to the occupants in and out of the building, right? If you don't build something resilient, you're putting lives at risk. If your climate event does occur, oh, and we're in the Midwest, tornadoes are becoming more of a thing, right? And how do
right.
we design for that? But at the same time, Sadra brought up a good point about the flexibility or really adaptability of the project to new technology. It can expand, in my mind, to the function, adaptive reuse, being able to reuse the main elements of that building for whatever purpose. The building will likely, probably will, in today's codes and construction, outlive its current function. Can it easily adapt to the next
Right.
one? That's resiliency in my mind, right? Apartment
Yeah.
buildings go up all the time, and former office buildings probably wasn't designed for that, right? But there are elements that were maybe inherently resilient that we haven't thought of. Let's bring attention to that. And so I would say that And however you define resiliency, it kind of fits exactly how most people define.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And for our listeners, I'll remind them that we had earlier this year, we took a case study look at Nexus Park in Columbus, Indiana. And that was a former mall that I actually went to when I was a little kid at one point that has been turned into a healthcare facility using some of the same things that you talked about, Drew. Sadra, the WELL framework and LEAD have grown up alongside each other, but historically with a different center of gravity. So are they actually integrating in practice, or are we still asking clients to chase two kind of separate scorecards?
I think they're really integrated in practice at this point. As I mentioned before, a lot of people that are doing well, and they historically have done LEAD kind of as common practice for their buildings. And similarly, people that do LEAD are getting more interested in what is this WELL building standard? Can we do that also? So I think the two are very much intertwined in our clients' minds, and it's really not a one or the other. If we're doing one, why don't we do the other one? And really, it's the fundamental difference between these two standards is that LEAD asks, how does the building perform for the environment? While WELL asks, how does the building perform for people? And fundamentally, there is a lot of overlap in those concepts, especially in indoor air quality and other indoor environment quality factors. So absolutely, they work together very well.
That's a really good point about the overlap. Yeah, and when you lay it out like that, it's something that jumps out like, well, yeah, that just makes sense. So I'd like both of you to kind of walk us through a real moment on a project where sustainability or a sustainability decision and an occupant health decision pulled in opposite directions and how you resolve it.
I think one of the clearest examples that I can think of is something that comes up a lot in all different kinds of building types. And it's the dilemma created when buildings are tightened up so they no longer breathe. So what I mean by that is that in the pursuit of energy efficiency, our buildings have gotten a lot less leaky. We have vapor barriers, air barriers, foam insulation, things to make it so that building is really tight and does not allow air in and out of it, which is great for energy efficiency and thermal comfort, but it has some unintended consequences. Because what happens when we bring harmful air contaminants into that space, into that building, whether it's part of original construction and we painted with VOC paint or formaldehyde in our cabinetry, whatever that looks like to bring in, or that we then maintain the building with cleaning products and things like that, those chemicals are in that building. They are not having pathways outside of that building like our old buildings that were really leaky. So that I think is one of the challenges and one of the reasons that you can't really, in some ways, pick and choose for some of these strategies. You really can't say, well, we'll tighten up the building for energy, but we're not going to consider the health of the materials we're putting in it. They really have to go together, but a lot of times they appear to be a conflict with each other.
Right.
So that I think is definitely something that needs to be considered.
How ironic, where the industry's effort to make the physical requirements of building stricter, right? I think originated from the fact that we want a more comfortable, energy efficient, and less, I guess, mold inhabited space, right? But I think an important point, because in many ways it's done that, but it's also made, if you don't consider the human as part of the system of elements that make a great building, you really gamble, I think, with the health of the occupant, right? It becomes more volatile. And gambling is like, it keeps coming to my mind as the best word here, right? If you don't have the right partners, if you have a team that doesn't, or an expert, an architect, contractor that isn't familiar with this, and if one piece of that system is flawed, it's the human that's typically, right? You could add more insulation, make it tighter later on, but if you haven't considered how the mechanical systems have to react to that, how many people are occupying and breathing vapor into the air inside of that building, you might have created a worse disaster than if there was no building at all. That's troubling. It's ironic and a little troubling, but I know that the industry could do it right, but you got to realize, my earlier comment, right? the priority, the whole purpose of the buildings around the person using it, occupying, experiencing it. Don't sacrifice that first.
Well, and so all that you're saying brings to mind the last few years and then the wildfire smoke events. And I mean, specifically right now, we've had a situation through the Midwest and on to the East Coast with the Canadian wildfires that have been coming down. And last weekend, we were outside. You could totally see the haze. I'm sure you guys have seen the pictures of places like New York where it was orange. So my question is, what does a building that's sustainable but not resilient actually fail at when smoke rolls in? And Sandra, we can start with you.
Well, challenges with the quality of outdoor air and indoor environmental quality go back to the first buildings. We still see that in some other countries where you have to cook inside, and that creates bad indoor air quality. And we know studies have shown that outdoor air, if it's good quality, is very beneficial to cognitive performance, all kinds of wonderful things. So what happens when our outdoor air is no longer good, right? This is wildfire season here in Colorado, definitely a consideration. But it's also, we have to think about this as far as chronic pollution, because there are some areas where you just never have good outdoor air quality. So it really is a challenge that you can't implement some solutions that rely on natural ventilation, for instance, in the building. And all of that being said, so every space is unique, every building's unique. You need to look at the exterior factors, the interior. Once again, design resilient, adaptable systems. So that when you have these incidents, whether it is a high ozone day or wildfires or something else, that you can pivot what those systems in those buildings adapt to, ultimately for the health of everybody in the.
And that's a great point, Sadra. That question, Brian, I mean, it's easy to go down a rabbit hole with it. There's so, I think anybody tied into the building industry, whether that's, a contractor, a client, anybody that's been involved, even operating the building, can really imagine a lot here. And I think what the worst case scenario for me, if I had to throw the football down the field and see what happens in 100 years, if the wildfires continue to increase, smoke gets worse, and society continues to try to grow, what happens? And because some of our buildings that we're building today will be around in 100 years. That's the truth. So do we need to treat our buildings like spaceships? Are they isolated, controlled laboratories for human habitation? And you can quote any sci-fi movie you want. That's a little morbid for me, because that defeats the whole purpose in my mind of where this whole thing started and where it should have been. I think it forces us to actually think about the building as more than the building. If we need to go micro, which is the inhabitants and the experience and the health of the inhabitants, the occupants of the building, we also must consider the community, the location of it, where this thing is going. Obviously, the environmental piece, reduce the carbon emissions and impact of the building. Hopefully, if everyone does that in the dream world, it'll reduce the amount of wildfires, I hope. And I don't know how the climate would react, but we also have to deal with the symptoms. And the wildfires seem to be one of those symptoms. So I think there's like kind of a weird gray area that we're in right now of, do we have to optimize our buildings like spaceships when we want the people to be outside? Or do we just continue on the status quo right now, and wildfires may continue to increase and hurt the occupants of really society as a whole? So I think it's a really difficult and sad question, unfortunately, but we have to push forward.
I think one of the that really needs to be called out is that we need more innovation in our MEP spaces, as far as how do we create systems in these buildings. We have great guidelines for like hospital facilities on what needs to be put in there, but an average house or living facility doesn't have this requirement. So I think part of what needs to change, especially when you look at things like wildfires, have these very high levels of particulate matter that can embed themselves in the science pretty deep down. This is like a health concern. Part of it is also looking at innovative strategies to assure that the air quality is protected. And to some degree, that's a call out to our different agencies that legislate what's required, and also our innovation in engineering.
Sticking along those lines, healthcare clients have have to keep operating during their worst day imaginable, such as a week or two of wildfire. How does that change the calculus around energy systems,
Well,
IAQ, flow,
without
backup,
putting
all
on a
those terms?
doomsday prepper, bringing it to reality a little bit with some of today's realities. We just discussed wildfires, and I mentioned tornadoes a moment ago. I actually have an 11th hour change on our project to deal with the now increasing occurrence and happenstance of major tornadic events in Illinois, and that has completely changed the mindset of the client. They had one within a half mile of their building, and now it's like, do this, do that, change the game. It won't be the last time. Now I can almost guarantee that. And so there's,
No.
for me, it's, you have to, if I could get all my clients to be experts at chess, I would, but you have to get them to think ahead. What's the next 3 moves, right? What's the next 3, 4, 5 decades? What's the end game after you occupy the building or own it or maintain it? You have to put their mind in the future, but use today's opportunities. And I think that's almost an easy one. Utilities won't be any cheaper than they are today. So can you maximize your use right now, the funds that you have right now, to prepare for when utilities, say in any state that we currently operate in, will become so expensive you have to cut something? I hope not. One example is with clients I deal with
Right.
now in Illinois, particularly with the later energy codes that they have to keep up with, is installing or preparing for renewables. Particularly the easy one is photovoltaic, solar panels, and how that will offset later utility costs. Both are rapidly increasing in the state as they are throughout the country. Talk to anybody, everyone's complaining about it. A second one would be future thinking. There's some things in a building that you're not going to want to change throughout its entire life. Building envelope's an easy one. You may tuck point the brick. You may possibly replace the metal panel. Unlikely. You'll probably never touch everything else unless you're tearing apart the wall.
Right.
And so I think building envelope is a very important one to get right. Build that shell. Build your turtle shell. That'll last you the building's entire life. I mentioned that project where, the tornado, and now we're dealing with some of the real life examples of that. And the code tells us to provide PV. The cheapest route was to put them on the roof. The tornado that recently happened told the client, take them off the roof. And is this going to be something that's going to happen later on down the road? And this is a client that has never gone down that path. They have never thought more than the immediate realities on their projects. What are the needs for the patients and the staff right today? And with the climate changing and they're feeling the impacts of that, we're moving the PVs to the site, and we're providing larger space likely for future expansion of that system. Conversation that we probably would never have even come close to a year ago. It's funny how the experiences can rapidly change minds, and I think that's a good example of it.
So a follow-up to that, I'm thinking like a chicken or the egg sort of question, like embodied carbon versus high performance envelopes versus materials with the cleanest IAQ profiles. You sometimes don't always agree. So how do you think about the order of
embodied carbon versus high performance envelopes versus materials with the cleanest IAQ profiles? This gets back to that system of elements I mentioned earlier. And if we prioritize the person, it's easy to say the IAQ profiles, the materials will come first. And many times they do, but a lot of times that doesn't get designed until later phases in the project. Usually we plan out the project, we set the goals. We don't make those reality till later on. But I think to not design a facility that creates that volatility on human health risk is you have to kind of combine all of these at the onset of the project and understand, if we go down this route, say we have the tightest building in the world and it's net zero, that's amazing. That's great. You're going to save so much in energy costs. We must know or have a plan in place for the IEQ systems, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, heating, cooling, ventilating, all that kind of needs to play a part into that. So you have to have the right partnerships. So I think goal setting early on and having a clear understanding early on of the impacts of that, which takes experience. You're not just going to find anybody that understands that right away. You have to have those conversations, educate your client, educate yourself. But some of those decisions around materials and ventilation, those calculations, with those not occurring later on, you have to have the precedent as early on as possible. So when it comes to order of operations, I will always advocate, Brian, for, well, can we just do it right now? Can we talk about it right now? You know, let's try to make a decision. So don't delay it.
So let's pivot a little bit. I'd like to spend a few minutes kind of talking about the performance and innovation team at BSA. So what was the gap in the market that made doing this move and creating this performance and innovation team the right thing to do now? Sadra.
I feel like the creation of the performance and innovation team is a really important development for BSA, especially right now. I would say that traditional, quote, good design just isn't good enough anymore. Like you just said, we have clients that think of like the immediate, but we can't just think of the immediate needs of their population, the building. We have to think, what do we need to do for 5 years or 10 years in the future, if not further?
Right.
And we need to stay on top of this extremely quickly evolving landscape, both of evidence-based design, technology integration, and then really lean into innovation. What is good today is not going to be good enough in 5 years. And so this team brings together people that are thought leaders in various areas and is really going to push forward how we do designs on the various building types. And I think that is so important for everyone to really kind of lean into right now. So we make the best buildings that are resilient.
That was spot on.
Anything-
One of the things that we discussed in the pit team group when we first met was the purpose and why we were here, as always. And to start with the why. And I found the why, not a gap, Brian, at BSA, but an evolution of what one BSA means. It's not just everybody drawing the same details, using the same material, but Sadra's leadership, Tim's leadership, really everybody in that group is a leader, and evolving to a one BSA that has a like mind to progress this great thing that we're growing at BSA to help people. And I know we have the hundreds of millions of lives that we're going to affect and we're going to help. At BSA, we have this wonderful purpose, these wonderful core values. We're going to drive this home. This group is, I think, the accelerator pedal in many ways. We're going to challenge, we're going to disrupt, is a way to say it, dump a ton of Miracle Grow on this plant and help it bloom, right? And I think we have the right people in the room for that. And so I'm excited to see what comes of this, how we grow, how we evolve, and what the next step would be.
You mentioned the right people in the room, and you don't necessarily have to give names, but I'm curious, who else is in the group and the types of roles, and what does a typical engagement look like when this team is brought on versus brought in late?
I would say that this group is kind of generally thought leaders or like saying, but specifically who is in the group. It's a combination of planners, designers, engineering strategists, and researchers in the areas of architecture and public health. So it really is a wide swath of like people that are interested in building buildings. And so the idea is that we work collaboratively on ideas to achieve that goal. And the you're brought into the project, the better. Because as we know, any decision that's changed is money as you go through the project. So something that might have been pennies at the beginning as a good idea integrated into a project turns into thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars down the line with fundamental changes to the project and they're held with you. So really, the idea with this team is that we are integrated from day to help us really good ideas to bring up thoughtful, innovative strategies, and then follow the project through the end, because ideally we also want to do studies and see how these innovative strategies actually are working so we can continually
I would piggyback on that
designing for our
100%.
clients.
As you were speaking about that and describing the group, Sadra, it had me thinking about physical involvement of the pit team, the performance innovation team on a project. And we probably won't have enough energy to touch every possible hundreds of projects at BSA. Eventually this will grow, right? And we'll have and more involvement. But honestly, for anybody, if a project team or clients or the project just feels too perfect, if it feels super comfortable, you might want to call a performance and innovation team member, right? just look out.
You're not
I
pushing
almost
yourself
wish that
enough.
the one
Yeah.
we've had a couple meetings, and the kickoff that we had, I wish we had a stand-up audience. It was a wonderful conversation, and I think as energetic of a conversation as you could expect from people that and leaders that want to really elevate what we're doing.
So, from a client's perspective, what does this change about working with BSA? What can they ask for now that might have been a stretch a few years ago?
Well, I would like to think that they could have at any point asked for anything and
Right.
it would have met their needs and then some.
Yep.
But I would
That's
say
the BSA way for sure.
as far as a client's perspective on this, I think a lot of added value going into these projects right at the start, but it's not necessarily something that they're going to even be conscious of. It really is a seamless integration into what is already a good design and planning process that is utilized for projects. I think that potentially if a client comes to us with something that really is innovative and maybe outside of the realm of typical projects, I think they would get maybe some extra excitement from this group than they would have previously because BSA is putting the resources into this group. So it's not someone pulling off a project to look into innovation.
Right.
They are investing in this group with people that want to look into and learn more about the latest trends. And so I would say maybe the one thing that a client would see is a really receptive environment if they bring up something that's really not a traditional strategy.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
built
I mean,
in.
working with BSA from the client's perspective in this group that we've pulled together, in my opinion, I wouldn't use the word stretch. I would probably say it's something that they didn't know that they wanted years ago.
Yeah.
It's going to be asking them questions that maybe they've imagined and maybe they've worked with somebody other than BSA and just expected the expert to bring that to the table, to bring that to the project. We're going to deliver that at BSA. It's probably going to be better than they imagined, and that's what I'm excited about.
So you're a hospital system or you're a research university CFO and you're listening to this. What's the question you should be asking your design team that you probably
Fatal.
aren't asking yet?
I think I would ask that clients ask their design teams to be very specific and identify what strategies in their proposed designs will positively impact the well-being of the people in those buildings. I think that this is important because a lot of times both the design teams as well as the clients are really focused on, energy metrics or how appealing the building is aesthetically or some of these other things. And they don't really think about how these specific design decisions are going to impact the people day to day in these facilities. And so to me, what I would say is ask the design team, put it on their radar, make sure that this is something you're thinking about and your architecture team is thinking about, because a lot of companies say employees are our most important asset. And I think that is absolutely true. And yet we don't treat the people in these buildings like they are. So
Right.
how are you making them a priority in the design you are creating?
Yeah, it's you mentioned that's a
follow up to that.
money. The F is the money, and how do you tie that? I think previously Sadra had mentioned
Right.
tying our human experience, human health, in a way to return on investment. That's an interesting one. What is the return on investment for the human health impact of the project? That question comes to mind as a hard one to answer, but one that a great architect, designer, engineer will be able to walk the walk with the client on. Let's discover that together, right? And that could take many shapes. Clients can ask more specific questions around that. Can I walk the space before it's built? Can I feel what it's like inside there? Right? And I know sometimes tours are a thing, or we could put on an Oculus VR, but how do we, I would challenge clients and CFOs to ask that question on how does it feel to be in that space as an occupant before it's built?
That's really good. Well, we're gonna wrap there. I think this has been great, wonderful discussion, and I look forward to having you both back on in the future to continue this conversation about and lead and sustainability and resiliency. Hopefully, you'll come back and join me again on a future episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
I'd like to thank Drew and Sadra again for joining me on this episode of BSA by Design. You can connect with them each on LinkedIn. If you want to learn more about BSA, we encourage you to visit our website, bsadesign.com. There's a link in the show notes to contact us for more information. Be sure to subscribe to BSA by Design on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube Music so you don't miss an episode. And be sure to check out BSA on social media, including LinkedIn and YouTube. That will do it for this episode. Join us again next time on BSA by Design.